thank you everybody for joining us this evening. My name is Peter Mail and I'm a librarian here at Gold Coast Libraries. I'd like to thank you for joining me this evening and take a moment to acknowledge and pay our respects to the people of the Yugambeh language region, both past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who live here today. So tonight I'm very excited to be introducing Laura Greaves. Is that Greaves? Am I saying that correctly?
Well, yes, thank
Perfect.
you for
Laura is a multi-award winning journalist, author and proud crazy dog lady. That's probably should go first, shouldn't it really, I think, but
yes.
as we'll start to see as we start chatting. She's author of several books, including Incredible Dog Journeys, Dogs with Jobs, The Rescuers and Miracle Mutts. She's also written some children's books and some romantic comedies, and there is another common theme through a lot of those is some cheeky canines do make an appearance. So you've twice won the Dog Writers Association of America's Rio Award, is a mouthful, which recognises the best book about a dog that has impacted a human's life in a profoundly positive way. And we're certainly going to be talking more about that, as we go along tonight.
Great.
So Laura's here tonight, though, to talk about her latest book, which is called Extraordinary Old Dogs. And the format of tonight's session, just to let you know, is that I've got some questions. So Laura and I are going to have a bit of a chat with some questions for me to sort of kick things off. But please, Colleen and the participants, if you could put some comments use the chat feature in Zoom, and you can ask questions as we go along, and we'll certainly get to those sort of toward the end. So I'd love you to just type as you go. We can keep an eye on those, and but if it's sort of a bit distracting from the conversation, we'll go back at the end and certainly answer any questions that you have. So, all right, so should we let's kick things off. Yeah, so look, Laura, I've noticed just obviously doing a little bit of research on you and your background that a love of dogs seems to be a very clear theme within your writing. And so before we talk about your latest book, can you tell us a bit about where that love of dogs came from and then also how you came to become a writer?
Sure. Well, I think the love of dogs, I honestly can't pinpoint where it began. It's just always been a part of me. I've always had a real affinity for all animals, but especially dogs. And, they're early in my childhood and, throughout my life, there's been dogs that have been particularly significant for me. So very early on, and I actually wrote about this in the introduction to my first dog book, Incredible Dog Journeys. We had some relatives who had a farm down in the southeast of South Australia, and they had many working dogs, as farms often do. But I fell in love with one of them in particular, this Kelpie named Freddie. Yeah. And I was obsessed with him. He was just the best boy, and he was an absolutely tireless worker, as Kelpies usually are. Yeah. And one day he had a terrible accident. He actually fell off the back of a ute while it was, in motion. Yeah. And it really destroyed one of his legs. So often the case, with farm dogs is, although their farmers love them and value them, they are workers. And so if they can't work, there's sometimes not a place for them on the farm. And also the nature of the injury, may lead towards euthanasia being the kindest option for them. And I think that's what they were looking at with Freddie, because his leg was just mangled beyond repair. But when I got wind of this, I was in Adelaide, so 4 hours away, and I was all of about 7 years old, I think, and I wrote a letter to Freddie, just saying, I love you and I hope you get well soon and all the rest of it. And apparently my cousin, who was the farmer and Freddie's owner, was so moved by it that he opted to spend many thousands of dollars having Freddie's leg amputated instead of having him put down. And so he continued on as a farm dog for many, many years, just on 3 legs, and he was still incredible. So that was, probably the first instance of a dog that I sort of passionately loved. And then came Robbie, who was my first dog that was mine. So I was given him as a Christmas present when I was 10 years old. He was a West Highland White Terrier. My family actually always had Westies growing up, so I'm very familiar with the breed. But very sadly, Robbie was run over and killed when he was only a year old. And the worst bit about it was that the person who hit him just kept driving and just left him to die in the street. So 10-year-old me, of course, was devastated by this, but beyond my heartbreak, I was furious that somebody could be that callous, you know.
Mm.
I mean, they had to have known that they hit him and they just left him there. So I did, you know, one of the only things that was available to me as a 10-year-old, which was a 10-year-old aspiring writer, even then, I should say,
Okay.
which was write a letter to my local newspaper to just kind of express, not in so many words, but my belief that there's a special place in hell for people who hurt animals. And the letter was published, and the editor of the paper actually rang me to say that she, you know, enjoyed my letter, but more than that, how sorry she was about what had happened to Robbie, and you know, how that she was moved by it. And it was really the first example, I guess, in my, you know, formative years of the power of words, I suppose. You know,
Mm.
that you can really move people through stories in general, but stories about animals really seem to affect people in a way that a lot of other stories don't. So, of course, I would have preferred to have had Robbie, you
Yeah.
know, 15 years, but you know, that's what happened instead. And I do wonder to this day if that loss and that subsequent experience with writing about it in some way kind of set me on this path that I'm walking today.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, and it's funny. Your letter was the first one as well to the dog that got injured. So clearly,
Yeah,
writing was something for you, quite
yeah,
young. That
absolutely.
yeah.
And the irony, I suppose, or the amazing thing is that so I started out my career as a journalist, and I got a cadetship on that same newspaper after I finished high school, and so
Uh,
that was where I did my journalism training.
oh,
Yeah,
it's a lovely, yeah, lovely tie-in. Did you remind them about the letter that you wrote
I
them
did
in
actually.
the interview?
You remember me?
One of many letters, I suspect.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, Now, I understand the inspiration for your new book, Extraordinary Old Dogs, is your dog Tex. Can you tell us a little bit about Tex and why
Yeah,
he inspired you
absolutely.
to write this book?
Sure. Um, so this is the new book, in case anyone hasn't seen it, Extraordinary Old Dogs. Oh, look, it looks like half of
A
half
bit
of
shiny.
um, yeah, so I have three dogs, Tex, Delilah, and Coco. Tex is 13, Delilah is 10, and Coco we think is about 6, but we're not 100% sure because she was a stray, so we don't really know anything about her background. But Tex and Delilah are my seniors, and I've had them both since they were 12 weeks old, respectively. And Tex, bless him, has a very long, long list of medical problems. So he has epilepsy, leukemia,
Wow.
arthritis, he has hypothyroid disease, he is deaf, and he also has an anxiety disorder. So a whole lot of stuff. And some of those things started quite young in his life, but he has sort of accumulated more and more things. Oh, he also has an incurable lung disease called bronchiectasis that makes him cough constantly. So he does
Wow.
it pretty tough, poor old
Yeah.
Texie. But he's just, you know, he still loves life and he still has a great quality of life. He still wants to walk every day and play, and, you know, he's very sweet. But he does have to take a lot of medication. So I have various alarms set on my phone to
Oh,
remind him his tablets at different times of the day. So one day I was trying to get him to take a tablet, and he's normally great about it, but this day he decided he didn't want to borrow it. So I was trying to find something in my fridge that I could hide the tablet in so that he would swallow it. And I just suddenly thought, as I was doing this, so many people just would not bother.
mm,
You're
yeah.
old, you're sick, you're expensive. Some people would think you're no fun. I think he's still a world of fun, but I know a lot of people would think that way, and they just wouldn't bother. You know, they would trade you in for a younger model, or
Yeah.
they would even have you put to sleep. And as soon as that thought entered my head, I knew that my next book had to be about old dogs, because Tex is still wonderful, and all old dogs are still wonderful, regardless of whatever it is they're dealing with. And not only are they worthy of love just by virtue of existing and being perfect specimens, but so many of them are still doing great things. They're still really capable of wonderful things in their golden years. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight that, and hopefully, I don't know, encourage people to look at their old canines in a different light,
Yep.
perhaps.
And so that led you down the path of sort of how did you then go about finding some dogs for your book?
Yeah, well, Google came in very handy.
We love Google.
So, yeah, I came up with all these, search terms of great old dog and old dog saves and elderly canine and, all these different things I could think of. So some of them came that way. Some of them came through my own kind of networks because I've been dog mad forever, and I've been a writer for more than 20 years now. And in fact, for a couple of years there, I was the editor of a dog magazine. And I'm also involved in, animal welfare and sort of dog rescue charities, that kind of thing. So I do know a lot of people in that dog world. So I was able to reach out to them and kind of ask if they had any stories that fit the bill. But the other great thing is that everyone who knows me knows that I am a crazy dog lady. So
you probably get sent a lot of stories too.
Anytime a cute story about a dog goes viral, I will be tagged in it like several dozen times, to the point where I have to sort of say on Facebook, like, dear friends, I have seen the story about the dog that saved the baby deer. Like, you don't need to keep tagging me in it. But I love that people do that. I have no problem at all with being known as a dog nut.
No, that's great. So can you tell us about some of the dogs that feature in your new book? Some of the characters,
Yeah, so there's 15 stories in this book.
Okay.
One of the ones that's been getting a lot of attention is actually a Queenslander.
Okay.
So her name is Maya. She's on the Sunshine Coast, though, rather than the Gold Coast.
Just up the road.
Yeah. So she belongs to a scientist, an environmental scientist called Romaine Cristescu, who works with the University of the Sunshine Coast, and she's the co-founder of their Detection Dogs for Conservation team. So they have a whole bunch of dogs that are trained for different animal detection roles, essentially. So there's dogs that go out and find quolls, there's dogs that go out and find koalas, and Maya finds koala poo. She's a koala detection dog that will quite possibly never see an actual koala in her lifetime. But she sniffs out koala poo because the poo, or the scat, to give it its proper scientific term, is enormously valuable to researchers like Romaine and her colleagues. So from the scat, scientists can get info like what koalas are eating, how healthy they are, how diverse the populations are, how they're moving around within their habitats. And that's particularly Romaine's concern, I suppose. So she specializes in man-made habitats. So she needs to know where the koalas are and how they're using those habitats so that those habitats can be protected. So Maya has a colleague named Bear, and Bear went viral after last summer's terrible bushfires because he was pictured in his little booties going into fire grounds to try and find koalas. And that was actually what led me to the story, because in reading about Bear, I learned that, as is so often the case, behind every great man, there is a greater woman.
Absolutely.
And Maya, who paved the way, she was the first member of this team. She was purely experimental. They didn't know if she'd be able to do the job when they selected her and started training her. But again, she was a rescue dog as well, so they're not 100% sure of her age, but she's somewhere between 10 and 14 now. Wow. And still doing the job and still doing it brilliantly and paving the way for all these other impressive dogs to follow in her four steps.
Wow, oh, that is very impressive, isn't it? And I do remember Bear, there was a lot of coverage at the time.
Everywhere.
Yes.
So Maya's a great one, I love that story. And there are, of course, lots of stories in the book of dogs that are physically doing great stuff. But for me personally, the stories that really resonate with me are the ones that have a bit more of a spiritual kind of element to them.
Yeah.
So my personal favorite story in the book is the story of Susie.
Okay.
So her story happened in Philadelphia in the US. And essentially what happened was that one night this young family woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning to find this old, injured, emaciated dog sitting in their kitchen. They had a dog, but it wasn't this dog. This was a new dog that had no business being in their house.
Wow.
All their doors and windows were locked. They had no idea how she got in. They did ultimately discover how she got in, but I
Okay.
won't reveal
Oh,
that.
read the book, everybody.
But she picked the absolute right family when
Yeah.
she made her way into that house, because they immediately just accepted that this was their dog now. Like, there was no real discussion about it. They paid for all her vet bills, and she needed quite a lot of vet treatment, because evidently she'd been a street dog for quite a while and was not in great shape and
Yeah.
was old. But they also started an Instagram account in the name of this dog, who they call her Susie. And through that, they promote adoption in general, but they particularly promote the adoption of senior animals. So through Susie's Instagram account, which now has several 100,000 followers, I think they're up to about 150 adoptions that are directly inspired by Susie's story. So people have reached out and said, because of Susie, I went and adopted my own senior dog. So I just think, of all the houses she could have wandered into, she picked that one.
Yeah.
Now she's changed the lives of at least 150 other dogs. I mean, that's serendipity.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's beautiful.
Well, I was going to touch on that because I believe, obviously, in the sort of, the year that we've had and the COVID pandemic, I think there has been a real increase, hasn't there, in pet adoptions? But people looking for, whether it be comfort, whether it be distraction for the kids, during the homeschooling. So perhaps that's something also for, previously dogs that may have been overlooked, and so.
I hope so. And there have been lots of lovely news stories coming out during the pandemic about shelters that were completely emptied by people adopting. And that's really wonderful. I just think, we have to be really mindful of the fact that as people increasingly go back to office-based work, or, have to start working outside of the home again, my real worry is that there will be a sudden influx of dogs being dumped all over again.
I guess that's it, isn't it? Or the dogs, there's that whole separation, isn't there? Because they're so used to someone being home all the
That's
time.
right.
And then as people go back to offices and workplaces, that could be an issue.
Yeah. I mean, I hope, the optimist in me is like, no. All these people will have realized how perfect dogs are and how they can't live without them, and, they'll keep them forever. But perhaps the realist in me is a bit more fearful of the way. So,
well, hopefully your book is helping us, change our attitudes and the perspective as well. Just Maggie, I have heard a little bit about Maggie in your book. Could you tell us a little bit about Maggie? I thought that was a lovely story as well.
Yes, Maggie was amazing. So Maggie is unofficially the oldest dog that ever lived. And she was owned by Brian McLaren, who's a dairy farmer in regional Victoria, and Maggie was his cattle dog.
Okay.
And she's believed to have been 30 years old when she passed away.
Wow.
Only a couple of years ago. Absolutely incredible. And the reason that she's unofficially the world's oldest dog is because Brian had all her papers, but he moved from living on the farm to living in town, and all those papers got lost in the move. They were misplaced somehow or thrown out or something. So he didn't have the paperwork to make it official, which means that actually another Victorian dog who lived around 1912, I think it was, he is still officially the world's oldest dog, and he lived to be something like 29 years and 3 months. But Maggie, Brian believes, was older than that. And the reason he knows that is because they got Maggie when his youngest son wasn't yet at school. So he couldn't have been more than 5.
Yeah.
He was 30 when Maggie died.
Wow.
So
yeah,
he was 34 when Maggie died.
Still working the farm, or not? She slowed down.
The funny thing is, the only reason they suddenly realised how old Maggie was because one of Brian's other sons made a joke about how Maggie hadn't done a day's work in about 10 years. Brian stopped and thought about it, and he thought, actually, that's right. She slowed down, and then, she actually did just stop, and she would just kind of hang around the dairy and, keep the feral cats in line and all the rest of it. But she hadn't actually been out into the paddocks rounding up the cows for about a decade. And then she lived another kind of 5 years or so beyond that.
Gee.
So she was actually working, up into her late teens, possibly even around 20. So she was amazing.
Gee, that is incredible. There
Yeah.
is it, I know dogs, the human years, dog years. Are there any sort of myths? Do you need
Yes,
to bust some myths around that? Because if you hear 30, if you do the math on that, that's,
yeah. If you
and my
hear 30,
math's terrible.
you think she's 210.
Yeah.
Would be a very good innings. But actually, no, the whole thing about one dog year equating to 7 human years is incorrect.
Okay.
So the thinking from vets is that about the first 12 months of a dog's life is roughly equivalent to about 7 years in terms of the level of physical maturity that a dog achieves in that first 12 months.
Yep.
So, the systems and the brain and whatnot are as developed at 12 months as a 7-year-old child. But after that, there's absolutely no truth to the 7 years, 1 year thing. The way a dog matures and ages completely depends on their breed, their size, because large and giant breeds age much more quickly than small and toy breeds.
Okay.
Like if a Great Dane, for example, makes it to 10, that's incredible for a dog that size.
Yep.
But meanwhile, you've got Chihuahuas and Poodles living well into their 20s.
Yep.
And of course their overall health plays a part.
Environmental, I'm sure. Yeah.
Right, the kind of life that they have, how well they're loved, and whether
it's a bit
they're
like humans, isn't it, really?
absolutely.
Livestock.
So it
Yeah.
is a myth. It is a myth. They all age and mature differently, but how well we love them and look after them plays a big role.
So I think you touched on this before, but I'd sort of asking about a favourite dog is probably a bit like asking someone about a favourite child. So maybe you shouldn't, but you did mention it was Susie, was it? I think that sort of had touched your heart.
Yeah, I love anything to do with, those sliding doors moments.
Yeah.
Where if she'd gone into the house next door,
yes,
or if the thing that happened that allowed her to get into this house had happened 30 seconds later, she wouldn't have been able to get in there.
Yeah.
So a million things had to happen in such a precise order for that to happen. And what are the odds?
Absolutely. And as you said, then the lives she's touched, totally. Yeah.
That's right. That's great. She picks the best people, and they always do with us.
Well, that's it. It is true, isn't it? Definitely. Just with regards to your writing process, if we can touch a bit, a lot of the people that tune into our author talks are really interested in the writing process, and you've obviously got lots of experience there. But how long sort of did it take you from sort of that thought when you were giving Tex these tablets to sort of publication of this one? Yeah.
Well, in theory, it's about a year. By the time because usually Penguin, my publisher, releases my books in late November. So by the time, but I've usually delivered the book to them in April or May.
Yep.
So by the time I've finished a book and delivered it to them, that's when I start thinking about my next one. But the truth of the matter is, I'm not a very organized person. And every time I start a new book, I think this is the one. This is the one where I will change my process and I will be organized and it will be stress-free and wonderful. And then it never happens that way. So actually the physical researching and the writing is somewhere between 3 and 4 months.
Okay.
So I actually write very quickly. But I've tried to start earlier and space it out more. And for whatever reason, I sometimes blame my previous career as a journalist.
I was thinking that, yeah.
All about daily deadlines, and you never had the luxury of time. You just had to bang it out.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of got
your training. Yeah, absolutely.
Now I can't evidently work any other way.
Your publishers probably love that too. There's no chasing you.
My editor did say to me once, Laura, this is just how you work.
Yeah.
Stop trying to fight it and just accept that this is how it happens. But one thing I do always do is I do all my research and all my interviews with the dog owners first. I like to have all of that ready and then I just write.
Okay.
Although sometimes if I haven't been able to get hold of somebody and they come through at the last minute, I'm having to research and write at the same time. But I prefer, because they're two very different things for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I prefer to thoroughly engross myself in one aspect of it and then go into the writing part of it so that my head can be clear and just focused on that.
And was there a bit of travel involved for these, going to meet some of the dogs? Did you hit the
Not
road, or it was sort of...
unfortunately, because I started writing this book just as the pandemic began.
Oh, okay. There you
So
go.
I started writing it in kind of mid-January, I think, and
Yeah.
it all sort of
It
kicked off.
started, yeah.
Yeah. But previously, yeah, I have met as many dogs as possible.
Yeah.
Usually just the New South Wales ones because I'm New South Wales based.
Yeah.
But the good thing about the pandemic, if there is a good thing, is that even though I couldn't meet the dogs this time, because everyone is Zooming all the time, I did get to see a lot more of them.
Oh, that's, yeah, lovely.
I have with previous books. But I've also met some of the dogs subsequently. So, for example, this beautiful girl, Clove, who's on the
Look at that.
look at that. But she lives in New York, and I met her last time I went to New York, and I got to take it for a walk through Central Park, and it was really, really cool. So I have met some of them since. Yeah.
In your travels. Fantastic. So ideas bubbling away for the next. Is there, can you give us any little teasers?
I'm working on the next book now. So it's due in April as well. And it's called, well, the working title is A Dog's Best Friend. Okay. And it's going to be all about dogs that befriend other species.
Okay.
You see those lovely stories sometimes about like a dog that's best friends with a duck and things like that.
Yes, yeah.
So it's going to be all of those type of lovely stories. And I wanted to write something that's just pure joy. You know,
I think perfect for the times.
Just something truly, truly lovely. So I think that's going to be a really nice one.
Absolutely. Sounds like a lot of fun, and I do think we need some joy. So, and I think just know I don't know whether it's a stage of life, you go through the engagements and the weddings and all of my friends are getting puppies at the moment, and I know we sort of touched on, but I seem to be in the middle of a puppy pandemic around me. So it was, it's funny because I've been chatting to a lot of my friends about talking to you, and and that whole old dog thing. But I very much, and I do think it is part of that we were saying about COVID and what dogs bring to people's lives, that just companionship and comfort and
that's right.
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, for people working from home, you can't beat a senior dog because, puppies are amazing. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, they're a lot of work though, aren't they?
I raised dogs from puppyhood and loved every moment of it.
Yeah.
But puppies chew everything and they need to be house trained and they need to have their obedience commands drilled into them and they get into all kinds of scrapes. And when you're trying to have a serious work meeting in your home office, they're going to be whining or piddling at your feet. But senior dogs, for the most part, don't do that. They just want to be by your side, and all they need is a warm bed and some good food and some belly rubs. Really, they ask for so little, but they give so much. They give their whole lives to the right person if you're lucky.
It's an unconditional love, isn't it? Too, which I mean, right.
And which is why it's so heartbreaking and also kind of infuriating that anybody would dump an old dog after a lifetime of love. It feels like such a betrayal,
Yeah, well, absolutely. We've got, if anyone wants to, I'm going to reiterate too, we've got the chat function there. If anyone wants to type a question, please, to Laura, please do. She's here to sort of answer any of your questions as we go along. That's sort of the end of what I had wanted to talk to you about. We could keep talking about dogs, and that's great. But I'll just give everybody a moment if you'd like to pop in type a question in the chat. But maybe we've covered a lot of those. But it's good. So have you been busy with the touring of obviously not touring possibly at the moment with the way it's been? So getting very good on Zoom and.
Yeah, I have done quite a lot of events actually. It's really interesting because. My last book, which was this one, precarious pile of books there. My last book, which was Miracle Mutts. In fact, this is not my actual dog, but Tex is one of these.
Is that type of dog?
Yeah,
gorgeous.
A duck calling retriever, and so is Delilah actually.
Have any of your dogs featured photographs in these books or not?
No, sadly
You're
no.
saving that.
The funny thing is, Tex has become quite the media star because people really seem, because I write about him in the introduction to this book and
Yeah.
how he inspired it, and people really seem to pick up on that. So he was in the Australian magazine, he was in That's Life. We went on the morning show together on Channel 7, and
I did see a snippet of, yeah.
yeah. So it's really
How do you
wonderful.
find that? That's TV studio. That was
Yeah, fine with it. I mean, the
really,
good thing about Tex, having been through everything he's been through and having made it to 13,
yeah,
doesn't care.
yeah.
He's like,
One of the joys.
okay, fine, let's go here. And, he just sat there, and then we left and he was like, oh, we're done, are we? Okay.
Wow.
No problem with it. Which is
Oh,
great.
that's good. Actually, one of the themes too, obviously, with the book is aging, and I think clearly we're talking about old dogs in this book, but there are some real parallels, aren't there, between sort of the value of things that are old and
Yeah.
getting old, and
Yes. Oh,
yeah,
100%. I think that, as a society, we don't value aging in general. We don't think that old things and old people and old pets have a lot to offer us.
yeah,
Speaking very generally, of
yeah.
course, I know not everybody
It
holds those
feels,
beliefs.
yes, yeah,
But even you look at the fact that many old dogs and old cats that find themselves surrendered towards the end of their lives, it's often the case that they are owned by elderly people who've had to go into assisted living
yes.
facilities and are not allowed to take the dogs with them, or
Mm.
their pets in with them. So it's not the owner's fault that the dog has had to be surrendered.
Yes, yes,
But I think there's, why isn't there a family member or a friend or somebody that will step in and take on that old dog? Because
mm.
they don't want the trouble, they don't want to be burdened by it. And similarly, why aren't aged care facilities dog friendly?
Yeah.
Or at least some of them,
Yeah,
because
you do hear, don't you, of some sort of dogs going in to visit people and the joy that brings, but
that's
not a
deliberate.
resident dog, I guess.
No,
Yeah,
it is becoming maybe slightly more common, but
yeah,
I just think it's testament to the fact that, you know, there's all kinds of research that shows how important the companionship of an animal is, and
mm.
it can reduce stress, it can even lower blood pressure, it can be incredibly valuable. But do people not care that an elderly person is having to give up those benefits?
Needs,
Like,
yes.
do we care so little about the well-being of our senior citizens that we just think, oh well, you'll cope without the pet that you've had for a decade, or
Mm, mm.
I mean, yeah, I find it really sad, and I really hope that's something that can shift along with, we're always hearing about what an aging population Australia has. So hopefully, the way we care for our older people will shift also, and will change to be able to include their pets.
I think it's time for you to write some more letters, Laura.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
You need to start writing to newspapers.
that's right. Yeah.
I think everyone's being a bit shy here. I'm not getting any questions coming through. Is there anything that we sort of haven't covered with your book that you'd like to have a chat about, or if you'd like to share another story in the few minutes that we've got left?
Sure, I can share another one. Let me see. The funny thing is, quite a lot of the events and things that I've done have wanted to talk about all the same dogs. Like, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So give us a different one if you've
Yeah,
got
I will. Let me
one
have a
that someone hasn't asked you about. But
yeah. Well, one that I really love is, and I love it because this dog didn't do any one single spectacular, interesting thing. This
yeah.
dog just um, kept on keeping on through his whole life and through everything that life threw at him. So his name was Arnie, and he was actually a Blue Mountains local. So I live in the Blue Mountains, and I actually got to know Arnie's owner, who is a wonderful artist by the name of Jane Canfield. And I just fell in love with her work, and I actually now own several of her paintings. But through getting to know Jane,
Yeah.
I got to hear these stories about this wonderful poodle that she'd had called Arnie. So much like Tex, Arnie had a litany of medical issues and just disasters through his life. He had to have one ear canal removed. Eventually, he had to have both eyes removed at different times because of glaucoma. He nearly drowned once. Jane had to do mouth to snout resuscitation to
I didn't know that was a thing. Really?
No, she didn't either. I mean, she just, I guess, in her panic mode,
yeah.
everything. Yeah.
Oh.
He acquired a paralysis tic and nearly died from that.
Yeah.
He got a blow to the head when one of Jane's paintings fell off an easel. He started having seizures in his later years, and ultimately it was a seizure that ended his life.
Wow.
But Arnie, again, like Tex, and I often steel myself when I talk about Tex and all his problems. I'm a little bit worried that somebody will say, oh, well, if he's so sick, put him out of his misery kind of thing, because some people will think that way.
Yeah.
But I would never do that because I know that he still loves life. And that was exactly the story with Arnie as well. He loved life. He went with Jane everywhere. She has this fantastic old vintage combi van that she drives around and paints the countryside in, and he would go with her, and she took him to restaurants. She snuck him into the movies. He just had the best life.
That's a quality of life, isn't it? I think is what is so important at the end. Yeah.
100%. And he was 17 when he passed away. And, I just think, he didn't do one big spectacular noteworthy thing, but he just proved time and time again that dogs can adapt to anything. They will make the best of any situation, and all they want is to be with you, with us.
Yeah.
So Arnie couldn't see, he could only hear out of one ear, but none of that mattered to him as long as he was by Jane's side. So in a way, if any story in the book illustrates, he was also her muse. I mean, he did inspire some of her paintings. And in fact, I have a painting of Arnie that she did. And even now, he died several years ago, but he still pops up in her paintings, as do the dogs that Jane has now. But yeah, I just think, as I was saying, if any dog sort of typifies the beauty of old dogs and why they're so worthy of our love, it was him. He gave everything he had to his person.
Yeah.
And she returned the favor, and that's what we should all be doing with our pets of any age.
Well, I know you've touched, a lot of people. We've got a lot of holds on your book, the new one, absolutely. And we've certainly got quite a lot of your titles in the library. So dogs are always, as you were saying earlier, they touch people, and we've all got a story. And even if you don't own one, it's certainly at some point in your life, I know that you'll have come across one and one's touched your heart. So, yeah, thank you for reminding us about the value and and we really look forward to what's coming next for you, and wish you all the success with this new book.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. That is an absolute pleasure. And as I said, we've got a number of Laura's books in the library, and quite a few holds already on this new one. So get yourself in the hold list. But we'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to what's coming out next. So thank you.
And thanks
for
being tuned in.
Yeah, and Pat, Tex, and the other guys for us.
No chance of that not happening.
All right. Good night, everyone, and thank you. Thanks again for joining us.